About a month ago, it was a beautiful late summer day, and Melinda and I decided to go for a walk along the Willamette River. We started at Willamette Park and followed the path north. As we passed the boat launch area, we saw signs posted warning everyone not to go swimming and not to let their pets go swimming because there was a toxic algae bloom in the water. And I thought about how fortunate it is to have that warning posted, because without it, how would anyone know that the water was dangerous? It was warm, it was sunny out, and the water looked so cool and inviting. And I wondered how often in the past people or animals had gotten sick because there was no warning about toxic conditions. Our gospel reading for today offers a warning about toxic conditions. Jesus told a parable to help his listeners recognize something truly dangerous in Israel's life together. It might seem that the priestly authorities were venerated elders who oversaw the worship of God's people in the temple. In the imagery of the parable, they would be honorable tenants who faithfully cared for God's vineyard. But Jesus wanted his listeners to recognize this was not the case. The priestly elites were greedy usurpers who had commandeered the worship of God's people for their own benefit. At every turn, they exploited the common people to enrich themselves, adding a temple tax on top of the already burdensome Roman taxes. There was also a whole system in place to take more money from the people at every turn when they came to offer sacrifice at the temple. And when people couldn't pay the temple tax, the priestly elites would seize their land, building massive estates for themselves and forcing the poor to beg and work as day laborers. Israel was supposed to be God's alternative community that was grounded in justice and compassion, where everyone had enough. But the religious authorities were using the temple as a tool to milk the people dry. It was absolutely toxic. By showing us what a real toxic mess looks like, I wonder if the story also invites us to think what trustworthy and honorable tenants might look like. Ones who recognize that they are working someone else's land and who then faithfully bring the fruits of the vineyard to the owner. In the case of the ruling elites in Jerusalem, the temple didn't belong to them. Their duty was to care for the worship life of the people so that they could present to God a healthy covenant community, one that really did live according to God's vision for the human family, a people grounded in justice and compassion, and where everyone was valued and everyone had enough. Although Jesus focused his words on the faithless ruling elites in Jerusalem and how they exploited the common people, it seems to me that this parable is just begging to be applied to other situations where people abuse their power and act only for their own benefit, betraying the trust placed in them to act for the well-being of all. We are currently in the middle of a toxic political crisis in the House of Representatives. Multnomah County and the city of Portland are in the middle of a toxic crisis of leadership regarding homelessness, addiction, and mental illness. And the whole human family is in the middle of a toxic climate crisis. with entrenched economic powers dragging their feet toward making any significant change. And with every one of these contemporary crises, I find the perspective offered by Jesus' parable to be profoundly clarifying. God has given us all gifts of body and mind and spirit, and has entrusted to us the care of God's world, the care of our common life, the care of neighborly relations. We don't own any of these things, and they're not just for us. We are workers in God's vineyard and are responsible to work for God's purposes of compassion and justice and healing and reconciliation, so that God's gifts can be a blessing for all. It's hard to come away from this parable without a sense for what a mess things are, both then and now. And when Jesus asked the temple authorities what they would do with a mess like this, what they would do with greedy tenants like this, their response was incredibly and predictably harsh. Put those wretches to a miserable death. Fortunately, that isn't Jesus' answer. And Jesus' answer is where I find something hopeful and something beautiful in this story. Jesus quotes from the Psalms, "The stone that the builders rejected has become the cornerstone. This is the Lord's doing, and it is amazing in our eyes." Jesus knew that the religious authorities would reject him and reject his vision for the human family made whole. But he also trusted that God was at work through him to build a new home for the human family, a home where there is justice and compassion, and where everyone has enough. Jesus saw himself as the cornerstone who defines the character of this new home, this new dwelling for the human family. It might be normal for many people to act like the religious authorities, to be all about self-interest, and to act with violence when that self-interest is in any way challenged or threatened, and to turn a blind eye to the needs and hurts of others. It's what makes the human family such a toxic mess. But God has not given up on us. And God has not given up on building a new home for this wayward human family that we're part of. A home where there is a place for everyone, and where community is defined by compassion and forgiveness, and by generosity and humility. That is what God is working to accomplish through you, through us, through our life together and our way of following Jesus. He is the cornerstone. And so he is the one who defines the shape of our life together and the shape of the new home that God is building for the human family. Of course, we don't always get it right, do we? Sometimes the church itself is a toxic mess. But that's why it's so important, so essential that Jesus is the cornerstone. Because Jesus is all about forgiveness and second chances for us and for all of God's beloved creation. Jesus is all about reconciliation and making whole what has been broken. Jesus is all about the power of love, giving life and giving blessing and healing for everyone who is wounded by humanity's toxic self-concern. People of God, can you hear the amazing promise that Jesus has for us? In Jesus, God has laid the cornerstone for a new home for us and for the whole human family. And in this new home, there will be justice, there will be compassion, and a safe place for everyone. In this new home, relationships that have been damaged will be restored, and those who have been lost will be found and welcomed into God's eternal embrace. In this new home, there is healing for everyone who has been poisoned by the toxic culture around us. In this new home, there is a place for you, now and forever. Thanks be to God. Amen.